Hello everyone, how's it going? Kian here. We're just going to wait for 1 or 2 more minutes. We can just see a lot more people are joining, just a presence, so just so other people don't miss our fantastic introduction and the start of our webinar. We'll pause and we'll begin in about 2 minutes. Thanks for waiting. Hi guys, welcome to the webinar everyone. Thank you very much for joining. Before we kick off, I just want to make sure that everyone can hear us okay. Um, yeah, so if people could just get some thumbs up in the chat, which is great. Seeing some familiar faces down there, which is also great. Perfect. Okay, here, look, we'll kick off. So before we get into it, just to give you a bit of background, Sphere Drones, we're based out of Sydney, Alexandria. We also have an office in Perth. We do a lot of drone sales, but also remote operations, drone in a box implementations. And we manage that through a remote operations center in Sydney. What we're here to talk about today in particular is the difference between BVLOS and remote operations, and then the potential impact on business operations. Quite a topical webinar. A lot of the industry is moving towards remote operations, in particular drone in a box operations. So very excited to be here and talk about it today. So I am going to move on to the next slide, where we will get to do our own introduction. Since I'm speaking, I'll start off. But my name's Cian Gleeson. I sometimes refer to Cyan or Chan if we have the chance to connect in the coming weeks. Cian is my name. But I'm a project manager and I lead the commercial conversations for HubX and our drone in a box conversations. I manage our customer portfolio and all the implementations that goes with it. So I work across a multitude of different industries, predominantly mining, civil, and also some government bodies. So excited to be here today and discuss BVLOS and remote operations. I'll pass it over to Elliot, and he can do his own introduction.
Thanks, Dean. Hey everyone, nice to see you all. So I'm Elliot, I'm the chief remote pilot here at Sphere Drones. I've been here for about 8 years, and of course, in that time we've seen some interesting changes in industry. And obviously, at the moment, the thing that we're most excited about is the concept of beyond visual line of sight and remote operations. So excited to talk to you all about this one today.
Perfect, amazing introduction, Elliot. So we'll move on to the agenda for today, guys. We're going to keep it quite light, informative, and hopefully educational. So what we're going to be looking at is the differences between beyond visual line of sight and remote operations, the benefits of BVLOS and then remote operations, the regulatory landscape for BVLOS and remote operations, some use cases, how to get some stakeholder buy-in. A lot of my conversations actually revolve around that from a business case perspective. Who's the drivers on site? Then, how can you democratize that service and pass it out to everyone else? Quick case study for mine site monitoring and survey. And then, how potentially can we help? And then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. By all means, as questions pop into your head, fire them into the chat. We'll break at the end and do our best to answer them as we can. But yeah, that's quick agenda. So I'm going to pass it over to Elliot, who's going to talk about the differences between beyond visual line of sight and remote operations.
So, for those of you who are new to the drone industry, it's probably a good idea to start here in terms of, I guess, getting an understanding of the different categorizations that exist within the drone industry. So, I suppose what I'll probably start with actually is the visual line of sight over on the right-hand side there. So, visual line of sight basically requires the individual to be able to see and orient the drone while flying the aircraft. So, it's something where that limit needs to be respected to maintain compliance from a legislative standpoint. Once you start getting towards the limits of those BVLOS distances, it is something where you might want to step outside into operating further from the remote pilot by the use of trained observers, etc. So you can see there EVLOS, or extended visual line of sight, allows the use of trained observers to basically extend your operating distance. So there's two classes. There's extended visual line of sight class 1 and extended visual line of sight class 2, where class 1, the observer has to be co-located with the pilot, and class 2 doesn't require the trained observer to be co-located with the pilot. So that allows you to do some more fancy things, basically extending your operating distance. So maybe you want to daisy chain your trained observers and you might want to fly for kilometers and kilometers. Or you might want to do operations using the remote operations there. So you can do extended visual line of sight class 2, where you have a person in a remote operations center, and then you have a trained observer out in the field. So that's a good segue to kind of touch on the BVLOS and the remote operations. So, of course, beyond visual line of sight means that you're flying the drone outside the limit of visual line of sight. And so typically that would be a great distance, or it could be behind obstructions, etc. But it means that you don't necessarily have to have a trained observer to safely conduct those operations. So being able to increase your efficiencies and all that sort of stuff is boosted massively by being able to do BVLOS operations. And then the concept of a remote operation, I guess. Being able to have a person in a remote operations center and conducting the drone operation of executing those missions, etc., either via BVLOS or via EVLOS categorizations, just really allows you to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your operations. So, yeah, I guess that's it for this one for the moment, I think.
And Elliot, when we're looking at a BVLOS or a remote operation, tell me about it. Site-specific approval?
Yes, so with that, and that's a good point, Ken. So in terms of visual line of sight, you generally don't need area-specific approvals. As long as you're within the standard operating conditions or operating under your REOP, which we'll talk to in a minute, you can effectively go and fly wherever you want to, or wherever you need to fly, as long as it's within those set of parameters. If you wanted to fly outside of the line of sight under extended visual line of sight, for example, then that's not an area-specific approval. That's something where you could potentially go and do extended visual line of sights anywhere around Australia, as long as it's in line with the permission that you've been granted by the regulator. Whereas BVLOS is an area-specific approval. So it's something where if you're wanting to go and do BVLOS operations in one particular location, you have to do an assessment of the air risk and the ground risk for that particular site. And that is something where at this stage, CASA is keeping it locked to an area-specific approval.
Very informative. And as we move towards remote operations, Elliot, what's the difference in terms of the approval process? What else do I need to do to remote operation?
So in terms of getting an approval, wait, are you talking about the roadmap to get there, or are you talking about?
I'm talking about, so when I'm in the environment, I can understand what's happening in the environment. But as I move towards sitting in my office in Sydney, how am I able to monitor that environment?
Gotcha, thank you. So in terms of the difference then between a traditional, we'll call it a traditional drone operation where the pilot is out in the field, there is a difference in terms of the requirements for conducting that operation safely and effectively. The pilot who is in the remote operations center will need to have a good level of situational awareness to be able to safely and effectively conduct those operations. So, for example, you need to have an awareness of the air risk, the ground risk, and that can be done through things like stakeholder management and having tools available to you to ensure that you're making safe and effective decisions while flying.
And when we're looking at those tools, weather stations, air traffic monitoring, the ability to communicate over radio over IP. Anyway, we'll move towards the next slide and then we'll look at some of the benefits of BVLOS and then remote operations. Now, I'm not going to talk through everything on the slide. I've highlighted a couple of key points that I think are beneficial. So it really comes down to an efficiency standpoint. If you're doing a survey, for example, and you have to keep visual line of sight of that drone, you're trying to cover a large area, it's a bit of a nightmare having to relocate every time. We can just increase the operational range. Uh, Big thing is safety. So when we're typically flying outside of our line of sight, we can avoid going into at-risk locations. When we move towards remote operations, however, instead of going out into the field and perform the operation out there, we could potentially doing it from the comfort of your own home office, provided you have CASA approval, of course. But yeah, it just allows you to, I suppose, pilot that drone from a potential drone in a box or otherwise remotely. Big thing as well is obviously Australia. I'm Irish. I actually saw the option to put on captions down here in my in my webinar. I thought about it, but yes, I am from Ireland. And since I've come over to Ireland, I've realised how big Australia is. I've had the pleasure of travelling across the country, visiting some of our clients and customers, and it's really a massive place. So, for example, if I have a job in far north Queensland, the travel to get there would be a nightmare. And then obviously the cost to get there and the time that it takes to get there is also a big issue. So by having that kind of site-specific approval, in particular that remote operations upgrade, I can reduce that travel time and cost. It also, typically what we see is that there's a couple of key personnel who drive drone operations on site. And what happens is that stakeholders come to those personnel, and this is, I'm talking about democratizing drone operations on site. So stakeholders come to those key personnel and they say, can you do this operation? Causes a capacity issue for that guy or woman, and then kind of gives them a bit of a backlog of work. By using remote operations, you centralize, I suppose, the data acquisition service and then democratize the data across the stakeholders in the company. Scalability, big thing as well is once you're performing remote operations from I suppose, a service provider perspective, you're able to do a lot more operations in the same day than just one operation at one site. You could potentially cover 4 or 5 sites with drone in a box implementations across them all. With this technology as well, at the rate that it's advancing, we can also look towards, I suppose, advanced automation and integration. And essentially what that means is, yeah, you can collect the data off the drone, but instead of taking that data from the drone, plug it into your computer, uploading into a software, you can develop business cases to actually develop custom APIs and send that data wherever it needs to go to actually be processed and turn it into, I suppose, a tangible deliverable. One of the biggest things as well from talking to some of our customers is they're looking at this, the whole industry is moving towards it. It's about becoming a great place to work, just safer work environments and, potentially not being out in the field all day flying drones from VLOS perspective and being able to stay in the office. So next we're just going to have a quick conversation around the regulatory landscape for beyond visual line of sight and remote operations. I'll leave Elliot to talk to this one, much more qualified than I am in this regard. So take it away.
So effectively the best way to think about this is to break it up into 2 tracks. So you've got the individual track and then the organizational track. So I guess talking to the individual track to start with, it is important that individuals do go and get that remote pilot license to enable them to go and conduct drone operations under the company umbrella. So for those of you who haven't been exposed to it previously, a remote pilot license in Australia takes 5 days. You've got some flying and some theory sessions that you do, and that allows you to do basic drone operations. And then there are also, of course, license upgrades and things that you can get to expand that capability down the line if you need to. And then One of the accreditations that you will need to get if you want to go and conduct beyond visual line of sight remote operations is the IREX exam pass or the OCTA exam pass. So the IREX is the instrument rating exam, and the OCTA is the outside controlled airspace. So those two exams are the IREX is an aviation legacy exam, and the OCTA is one that CAS has brought out to facilitate drone operations. But effectively, those two allow you to go and conduct beyond visual line of sight operations, from a remote operations center, for example. And there are some nuances in terms of, you can potentially have pilot supervising and stuff, which we won't go into today. But those are effectively the requirement there for individuals to start operating BVLOS. And then from an organizational perspective, of course, to execute the privileges of a remote pilot license, you do need to be operating under that umbrella REOC. So the remotely piloted operating certificate is similar to the way that Qantas has an air operating certificate, and then all of their pilots have to have a commercial pilot license or an airline transport pilot license. Similar principle with drones. And so the normal kind of logical segue or the normal progression would be that you would get a REOC under visual line of sight operations, and then you might progress to extended visual line of sight operations as kind of dipping your toe into the water, and that could be EVLOS with remote operations center, or it could be the traditional EVLOS. And then there is also, of course, the next step then would be, beyond visual line of sight. So being able to fly outside that line of sight, you, of course, have to have those capabilities of, a drone system, the internet connectivity. Redundancies are, of course, really important when it comes to, operating in that aviation space. Having the situational awareness, environmental sensing, and air traffic management is all part of ensuring that you're kind of playing nice with other stakeholders in the environment. And so you kind of follow those tracks along, and then you get to the point where you're kind of ready to conduct BVLOS operations. But there is still that kind of last little hurdle of, ensuring that your technology stack is up to par to enable you to go and conduct those remote operations.
And how would I speak to any aircraft in the vicinity, Elliot?
So airband radios, of course, are the kind of requirement there. So that is something that would generally be, you would normally get a license with the remote pilot license. You would generally get an air operating certificate, a radio operating certificate. So having a radio over IP is one way that you can have, your drone in a box set up in, a remote location with the pilot in the remote operations center communicating verbally over the radio with, piloted aircraft traffic.
Perfect. And then monitoring local air traffic?
So ADS-B is a technology that basically, it's effectively a transponder system. So most crewed aircraft traffic will have transponders. It's a bit of a hot topic amongst the industry at the moment, which we won't open that can of worms right now. But effectively, an ADS-B transponder allows people to see where an aircraft is. And so from a drone operator's perspective, being able to see in the remote operations center, being able to see where a piloted aircraft is in relation to the drone operational area that we're conducting drone ops in, allows us to have that kind of safety case and make safer decisions.
Very nice. I believe Luke's in the audience, and he'll like that one in particular. But the other thing that we'll look at then as well is just from a situational awareness perspective, okay? So we can look at it. I see Luke give me the thumbs up. But just from a situational awareness perspective, we could have potentially cameras in the audience, or I suppose not in the audience, in the environment. And that will help us, maintain separation distance from potential people in that environment. But then also understanding weather. So if I'm not in that precise site-specific approval, I could have a localized weather station just to give me an independent weather station, just to give me, I suppose, wind gusts, rainfall, lightning strikes. And then once we have, that capability to monitor that environment, which is that technology, the football on the slide, if you haven't seen it, we can get to that final goal of remote operations.
And before you move on, Kian, as well, I guess in terms of like the internet connectivity and redundancies, that is something where, of course, if you just have one connectivity method where you're relying exclusively on one channel to keep your box online, then it is something where you might find yourself vulnerable in the event of a cell dropout. So that's something that we did see, about 6 months ago or 12 months ago. There was that Optus outage. I'm not trying to point the finger at anyone in particular, but having that redundancy in events like that does also provide you with that operational certainty that you can safely and effectively conduct and conclude your operations.
Amazing point, Elliot. Anyone has any questions, come find me afterwards. Uh, but yeah, we're going to have a look at some of the use cases for remote apps. So in particular, mining. When we're looking at mining, we were up at a mine site last week, and we're looking at pit models, particularly automating drill and blast. The environmental aspect of it, so site rehabilitation. Sometimes when you close down a mine site, it's good to be able to not travel out to that mine site and do your environmental monitoring from remotely, or even geotech analysis and just understanding changes in pit walls or hazards on site. We must give a shout out to some of other folks in the industry. They're doing great things in the agricultural space, particularly around bird scaring with drone and box technology and livestock counting. Some of the other use cases that I've explored is security. Some of the other use cases that I've done is civil. So in particular, baseline surveys of sites, and then using that data from an intangible perspective. For example, just understanding what's being built on site, who can get billed, but then making sure from an insurance claims perspective that you're covered off. Another big one as well is utilities, energy generation, fixed plant, wind farms, and just monitoring them as construction progresses, understanding degradation throughout time, and then solar inspections as well from a thermal perspective, hotspots on solar panels, understanding when things need to be changed for optimal solar generation. So one of the things that I've looked at in particular is actually the pathway to automating dock operations at a mine site and how we could potentially get there. Like I said at the start of the webinar, is that it's all about stakeholder buy-in. And when we're talking about stakeholder buy-in, it's like, yeah, one person says, I see the value in a remote operation for us. From a drone in a box perspective, how can I implement this solution? Essentially, the way that we see it is that you need to get multiple people using the system at one time, and then you can build out a schedule of operations. So, like I used an example earlier on from a capacity perspective, some surveyors get slammed by all these other teams who don't have REPLs. So you can actually centralize the drone operations from drone in a box, give people the credentials to actually use it, collect the data, and then remotely send it to whatever team they could potentially want. So when we're looking at this, some examples of teams on a mine site that could potentially use it: survey, driving it, fixed plant inspections, drill and blast vision, heritage inspections, rehab monitoring, and even haul road monitoring. Typically, when you get to site with one of these systems, people actually see the value in it and say, "Oh, wouldn't mind a piece of that for myself." And the focus of it is just, enabling skilled labor to do skilled operations. That's what we're moving towards. Remote operations would give you to do. So I talked a little bit about it already, but from mine site monitoring and survey, when we're looking at it, big problem: surveyor capacity, competing priorities. Team member comes in from geotech team and says, right, Cian, I need you to go out and do the survey with me, and I need it done by the end of the day. Throws off his entire schedule. Instead of going out to the pit, which could be potentially 45 minutes away to do that survey, you can actually automate the drone from your office, do the data collection, just remit it straight to him, process it, and away you go. Same thing for the environmental teams or the drill and blast teams. Like I said, just getting all the stakeholders together, developing that schedule of operations, and then automating the data capture. Some of our customers are actually doing live site pickups. So essentially what happens is that they put the drone in a box out up on the pit wall. They survey all their live sites. They process the data at the start of the day, and they send it out to all their teams. They're like, this is the data you got for today, guys. Live with it. We'll get another one for you tomorrow. Just alleviates that, John Doe calling into your office saying, can you do this? Some of the benefits then, what we're looking at is just reducing travel time pit, safer work environment, keeping skilled labor doing skilled tasks, and then turning yourselves into a great place to work. We also have a selfless plug in there about one of our own systems, HubX and DJI Matrix 3D, trailer-based solution, wheel outside, automated data capture. Anyone has any questions, come to me afterwards. But But we'll move on, and we're just coming towards the end of the webinar. But we just have a little bit of a slide here how we can help. I'll leave Elliot to talk to this one in particular.
Yeah, so I guess if it's something where you're new into the drone industry, or maybe you've been kind of dipping your toe in the water and you want to take your drone program to the next step, then it is something where we can help you get your internal pilots trained. We can help with amendments of your manuals for BVLOS operations, getting your first area approval. It can be a little bit daunting the first time you go and start getting into the realm of getting a BVLOS application ready to submit to CASA. And I guess that one of the benefits is having that application be put together in a way that is robust will help the application go more smoothly, rather than having different things get flagged and highlighted during your application process, and it taking that time a lot. Yeah, sorry, making that time kind of stretch out and become a longer process than it needs to be. So. And then, of course, we can help you with the technology integration and implementation as per the previous slide there. And then in terms of the remote operations center as well, so of course, given that we do have the remote operations center here, it is something where we have that ROC approval, BVLOS approvals, and we do have those area approvals in place already. And so being able to deploy a system more quickly through our remote operations center is, of course, an option as well. So if that is something that you're interested in, have a chat with Kian off the back of the call. And then, of course, we do have the Hub X and the Hub T in-house solutions for remote operations. So if it is something where you wanted to deploy a trailer-based solution or a more permanent solution, then those are options as well. So
very informative, Elliot. We should get you on the sales team. But so we actually have some time granted. 1 minute 30 left in the webinar. I think we killed it. We have some time for questions. I can see a couple rolling through, but anyone else that has any questions in the meantime, do post them in. I can see a couple more.
Awesome. So I can get started with a couple of these if you want, Kian. So we have a couple of questions around that ADS-B piece and around people who or operators of crewed aircraft who may or may not be using ADS-B. So effectively, this is a bit of a can of worms that is being openly discussed within industry at the moment. But effectively, for management of air risk for users of piloted aircraft who are not using ADS-B, that's where the other methodologies do come into place in terms of things like stakeholder engagement, having a NOTAM. So being able to publish in the airspace advisories and things that you do have drone operations going on site, basically providing as much notice as you can to all of the various stakeholders. You can do things like stakeholder engagement with, the local aerodromes, with, local aircraft operators, whether it's reaching out to the nearest stations. Maybe you have operators on site, who if you have an aerodrome on site, being able to engage with the companies that are flying in and out of that operation. But yeah, there's effectively only so much that you can do, and I guess as a kind of a final check in your balance sheet, you can also, of course, do an on-site survey. So keep an eye out for aircraft in that vicinity of your operations in the area where you're going to be conducting operations. You can actually go and do, a survey if you do think that there are going to be larger volumes of people operating in that area without ADS-B.
And essentially, just to top that off, it's all around risk mitigation. So we can do our best to actually actively do our side of things and monitoring that environment. But if people are flying around without ADS-B transponders and not adhering to NOTAMs, we've done our due diligence from a CASA perspective and doing all the correct items. Now, there's another question there. What's the approx time frame for BVLOS approvals from CASA? So I'll leave Elliot to speak to that one. We've a spreadsheet about this long of BVLOS approvals, and we're tracking them day by day.
So thanks for the question, Sean. So the short answer is yes. How long is a piece of string? The long answer is that basically it will depend a little bit on the complexity of what you're looking to achieve. As a rough guide, I would expect around 6 months to 12 months, depending on whether you've done BVLOS operations before. If you're looking to do a relatively basic operation via BVLOS remote operation center, it may be that it takes a little bit less time. If you're looking to do operations in complex airspace or in complex in areas where you've got a more complex ground risk, then that's where you might start to see the actual processing time with CASA take a little bit longer. But yeah, it is something where we have noticed that the queue does seem to be speeding up a little bit, which is nice. And CASA is working pretty hard to try and help with the fact that there are, slightly longer lead times on these sorts of things at the moment. They do recognise that this is where the industry is going.
Correct. And just, I suppose, to top that off, I suppose there's two different ways that you can look at it. Someone who's never had a BVLOS approval before, and then someone who's had a BVLOS approval before. Typically, when you've been approved already, you don't need to go through the rigmarole of having CASA, I suppose, approve your remote operations center and then come out and test you in the field. So we're looking at a 6-month wait time for anyone who has that approval in place already. For someone who's new into the game, it could be up to that 12-month side of things. What else are we looking at here? Nicely presented as always, gents. Thank you very much, Bob. Compliment on my Irish accent. Yeah, most questions there, guys, was just around wait times for CASA, BVLOS approvals, and then just ADS-B. I suppose, and how we monitor that and do some risk management on it. If there's any other questions, we can hang on for a minute or two, but if not, we can begin logging off.
Awesome. And feel free to keep in touch with everyone, guys. If you go to the next slide, so our details are just on this last little page here. So if there is any other questions, comments, thoughts, etc.
Our details are not on the last slide. You get info@spheredrones.com.au. But if you say nicely, can I speak to Cian or Elliot, they'll probably route it to us, hopefully. But thanks very much, guys, for the time today. Appreciate everyone logging on. We'll send out a follow-up email afterwards. If anyone has questions on remote operations, BVLOS, feel free to shoot us an email to info@spheredrones, and we'll get back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate you joining.